So today we begin the Olivet Discourse, and we just kind of scratch the surface of the Olivet Discourse this morning. We'll be in the Olivet Discourse for a few weeks at least. This teaching is called the Olivet Discourse because Jesus gave this teaching to his disciples on the Mount of Olives. The Olivet Discourse is one of the longest teachings of Jesus recorded in the Gospels, along with the Sermon on the Mount and the Upper Room Discourse. And in this teaching, in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus tells us the signs of the end of the age and of his second coming. And this teaching is vital for us so that we can understand the events occurring today, and so that we can know what to expect for the future. The Olivet Discourse is also recorded in Mark's Gospel in Mark chapter 13 and Luke's Gospel, Luke chapter 21. And it's helpful to look at all three Gospel accounts to get a complete picture of this teaching, because each Gospel includes different details. So it's worth your time to look at the other two sections. Now, just remember from our previous studies the context here. Jesus is in Jerusalem for the last time. He's only a few days from being crucified and dying for the sins of the world. To understand what's taking place here, you have to look back in chapter 23 to get the context. In chapter 23, Jesus denounced the religious leaders for rejecting him as the Messiah and for leading the people of Israel in rejecting him. And then at the end of chapter 23, verse 37, if you look back up, chapter 23, verse 37, Jesus said, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate," speaking of the temple. "For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Jesus indicated that the temple will be left desolate in verse 38, and he implied that he would come a second time in verse 39, but he would not return until the Jewish people receive him as Messiah and say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," which is the messianic greeting, the way that the Messiah is to be greeted when he comes. After saying this, Jesus immediately leaves the temple, and this ends his public ministry. He gives no more public teachings after this point. His remaining days are focused exclusively on preparing his disciples. And that brings us into chapter 24, where it says in verse 1, "Then Jesus went out," so it's just a continuation of the story. "Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple." Now, Mark's account and Luke's account of this give us more detail. They tell us that the disciples specifically pointed out the impressive stones of the temple. So here Jesus says the temple will be left desolate, abandoned, and as they're walking out of the temple, the disciples say, "Hey, Jesus, but look at these stones. look at these stones." Now, just to give you some background on the temple, Herod the Great began renovating and expanding the temple in 20 BC. This is taking place in about 30 AD. So Herod began renovating and expanding the temple 20 BC, about 50 years before, and the expansion of the temple wasn't completed until 64 AD, just 6 years before the temple was destroyed by the Romans. Herod created one of the wonders of the ancient world. The temple building itself stood more than 9 stories tall. It was made of white limestone and marble, and it was overlaid both inside and out with plates of gold, solid gold. The Jewish historian Josephus wrote that when the sun hit the temple and reflected off of the white stone and the polished gold, it was so bright and dazzling you had to look away. It hurt your eyes to look directly at it in the sunlight. The rabbi said, "He who has not seen the temple has never seen a beautiful building." The temple was one of the largest, most majestic buildings in the ancient world. The disciples marveled at the stonework of the temple, pointing out the stones to Jesus. Now, some of the stones that remain today in the retaining wall of the Temple Mount, because the temple's been destroyed, but some of the stones in the retaining wall that held up the temple that are still there today measure 45 feet in length, 11 feet in height, and 8 feet in width, and weigh more than 400 tons. Just one stone. Now, just to give you just kind of a little bit of a reference here, the ceiling right here down by the stage is about 12 or 13 feet. These stones are 11 feet, so almost as tall as the ceiling, and they're 45 feet long, which is from like that wall over to about here. Just one stone. And there's a bunch of stones like this in the retaining wall of the temple.